Dr. Elsden, what are your thoughts about the themes being addressed in the conference today?
Well, I think risk and risk management is a growing area where certainly my part of government has a growing role. We're much more interested in the science and technology aspects of risk. We're coming from the Office of the Government's Chief Scientist, but that underpins a lot of the issues that have been talked about today and will be talked about over the next few sessions. Certainly following on from recent events in Japan and Icelandic volcanoes and back in 2009, the swine flu epidemic that we were also involved with, and some of the scrutiny that's been applied to that by Parliament since about how we use science advice in emergencies has helped us focus on looking at some of those risks that potentially cut across owners within government, a number of key risks within the two main documents that we certainly consider within my office around the National Risk Assessment, which is looking about 5 years out at impacts particularly on the UK, and the National Security Risk Assessment, which is a relatively new document looking more at the 5 and 20-year horizon from a national security perspective.
Is it possible to do that?
I think the 5-year perspective is more manageable. The 20-year one, as we've heard in some of the talks and some of the panel discussions today, is much more challenging. But I think there are tools and techniques out there. We have within the office the Horizon Scanning Centre, which looks at developing tools for scenario planning and other methods for looking out much longer term. But you're right, the level of uncertainty associated with what's going to be happening in the world in 20 years' time is quite significant.
I would imagine that you're pretty confident that the government would never be accused, as has happened this morning, of suffering from myopia and inertia in dealing with a major emergency. And that was applied by one of the speakers to the way in which the Fukushima disaster was allowed to happen.
Well, I think the UK has learnt a lot over the last few years about how it responds to emergencies. I mentioned a few a minute ago, and Fukushima was one of those ones where I think we learnt a lot of lessons. And I think we work very closely with the Japanese, and the Japanese have been very keen to talk to us following Fukushima about how we deal with emergencies in the UK. We went out there and had a chat to some of their policymakers and officials around the processes that we use. They came over to the UK and spoke to the Cabinet Office and Sir John Beddington, my boss, about how science advice feeds into these processes. I think they were very open and aware post-event of the mistakes that they made and the issues associated with some of the risk management processes that happened particularly around the nuclear plants. But don't forget, this was a magnitude 9 earthquake and a 15-metre tsunami. I mean, they're pretty spectacular natural events, and nobody has died as a result of the nuclear event. Tens of thousands of people died as a result of the tsunami. So one of the other things that we work hard at is trying to put risk into context. Spending a lot of time, particularly around Fukushima, explaining the radiation risk, both to policymakers here in the UK and also to British nationals and others in Japan, about what the event or reasonable worst case that could arise from what happened in Fukushima would mean for people in Tokyo, for example.
Looking ahead, what can you take away from the discussions that have been going on? What can you apply to your own role, which is particularly about civil contingencies?
Well, we are working more and more with the risk community. We've done some work recently which will be published in the next few weeks, working with a number of people from here in Cambridge and Lloyd's of London and other risk organisations about how the government can better handle high impact, low probability events, some of those systemic shocks that are maybe outside of, or a failure of imagination. I think that phrase was used earlier on today. And I think that there are some pointers that come out of that about how we can do it better. It's not easy. I think that's fairly common perception that people will have here, or view people will have here. But you do need to be agile. You need to think outside of the box. You need to get the expertise from a broad community to come together to try and help you identify those things that you might not understand or come across in your general day-to-day business. And I think government appreciates that, and we've had a lot of support from both the academic community and the risk community about some of this work, and we will be working with central government, Cabinet Office and MOD in particularly to take some of those concepts forwards in some of the new documents that they're writing and refreshing at the moment.
Miles Elsden, thank you very much.
Thank you.